I spent 100 days in ARK Survival Evolved using just dire bears. In today's ARK video, I will be traveling through all sorts of extreme environments and escaping massive fucking creatures to survive this 100 days. My challenge will be to use only dire bears throughout this entire playthrough, even for all the caves. So, I'm gonna need a ton of luck. If I'm gonna beat the bosses of the ARK Island map and complete this challenge, please sit back, relax, and enjoy this 100 days video using only dire bears.
I'm dying. Help me.
I started off day one by heavily touching a tree for its wood and thatch before getting other resources like stone and a few berries. I made a stone hatchet before molesting this rock for some flint, which I used to make a stone axe. Perfect! Now all we need to do is get armor, build a safe base, not die to massive dinosaurs, level up to get dire bear saddle, tame dire bear, level up dire bear, breed dire bear, kill the bosses. Seems easy enough. I made some spears and full cloth armor. Looking back at this footage, I have come so far from day one. This video has taken me a lot of time to make, so leaving a like on this video would be massively appreciated. After checking myself out in my new armor, I touched a doda with a sharp stick, making sure to clean up my mess afterwards by harvesting its meat and hide. I came across a level 56 raptor, so I quickly crafted some boles and eventually killed it at dusk. I started off day 2 by looking at the Dino Finder mod to see where the dire bears are most prominent to determine my base location. I began to run up the hill to some high ground. There I would be able to see any upcoming threats in the way to my destination, the redwood forest outskirts. I made a campfire and cooked up some meat to fulfill my hunger before using my harvested resources to create my first wooden bow. Through the night I harvested all the stone and metal nodes around me to prepare myself for the days to come. I was met by a not-so-friendly Pego. I made quick work of him and harvested his peskai hide. I ran to the edge of a mountainside and, to be honest, really did not want to climb all the way down. So I harvested a few trees to gain some XP to unlock the parachute. I crafted it and took a leap of faith from the cliff edge and pulled the parachute. All was fine until I realized that I had parachuted near to Osaka. So I decided to run the opposite direction. Thinking nothing of it, I went to the water to place down my raft before absolutely shitting in my underwear. I attempted to use the raft to get away, but the crocodile was on my raft too. So I shot it with my arrows and hit it with my axe. But I ultimately died. I respawned and did not bother to go back and collect my loot, knowing that Sarko would still be there. I took a different route to the redwood forest. I ran up to a different hill and once more parachuted into the unknown. This time, however, I was not met by any hostile creatures, so I proceeded through the dangerous forest.
Go stupid.
When I said dangerous, I meant it. It wasn't long before I was attacked by these huge flying insects, of which I almost died to. I think if I had died to them here, you guys probably would not be watching this video right now. To release my anger, I got on that type timing and harvested all the chillin from their bodies. I then ventured onwards to the outskirts, running through countless trees and narrowly avoiding death by this low-level raptor. I once more found a high rock and pulled my parachute, slowly sailing through the skies, with my base destination in sight. This landing was much smoother than the first one. I was able to safely land on the shores of the redwood outskirts, a perfect position to find and tame some dire bears. Using my resources, I made and placed some wooden foundations, and as the sun rose to day 5, I completed the base with the walls and ceilings. This spot would prove to be a great home and base location in the future. You'll see why later. I finished up the base by placing down some large storage boxes to store all my junk items. Remember when I said this base spot was good? Maybe not so much anymore. As I opened the door, I looked to my left to see this huge red and white T-Rex. If this massive dino were to come over to me, it would definitely destroy me and my base. I steered clear from the Rex and came back inside to place some refining forges. It's safe to say that the foundations are in place for an awesome 100 days. I stayed inside for the rest of the night, probably eating something at the time. But anyway, I left the refining forge to smelt all the iron from our previous endeavors into ingots so we can develop into more late game items. As the morning of day 6 came around, I sorted my storage boxes and smelt more iron so I could finally craft the smithy. I used the newly placed smithy to create some metal tools and a nice crossbow. It is probably a good time to say that I used a few mods throughout this 100 days. Just quality of life ones to make my playthrough not as tilting. I spent the rest of day 6 harvesting stone and wood using my newly acquired metal tools. The harvesting continued into the morning. You may be able to see on the screen the dire bear marker, which is just a part of the Dino Finder mod found on the Steam Workshop. As day 7 came rolling around, I realized that to make the essential soul orbs and soul gun, I would need to start harvesting a lot of iron and crystal. So, a large majority of the day was spent walking up the mountain in the forest to gain these resources. The golden metal nodes gave me so much metal it was crazy. The crystal nodes were huge as well. Now I'd be able to create soul orbs and the amazing spyglass to help me when taming dire bears. I really love these parachutes. To get back down from the huge mountain, I once again leapt from the peak and surfed down, narrowly escaping a saber-toothed tiger. It took so long to get back to base, I was mid-air thinking whether the parachute might have been a bad decision. While running back to base, I was jump-scared by a terror bird, but luckily I was able to bowler the chicken and massacre him with my crossbow. I finally got back to base and immediately crafted the amazing spyglass. This thing would make it so much easier for me late game when I need to breed for melee and health stats. Later that night, I gave myself a little upgrade. I crafted hide armor and showed myself off to the camera. No longer a beta beach bob. I spent the whole of day 9 AFK, so I basically just left the metal from yesterday to smelt into ingots. Morning of day 10, and I knew exactly what needed to happen. I began making stone foundations and doorways and ramps to prepare to tame a dire bear. I had just watched a tutorial on the best way to tame a dire rare, and apparently the best way to do it is to use a strong trap. I placed the trap as I saw from the video and prepared for the fight of my life. I hit the dire bear from across the river and lured it towards the trap. The suspense was unreal. I tagged it as it was just peeking from the rock, and it ran at me with menacing pace. It was all or nothing. It swept me from the top of the ramp, but luckily he landed straight into the trap, exactly where I needed it to be. However, I was extremely nervous. There was still a chance I could mess this up. The dire bear has an awful health to torpor ratio, so I had to ensure I was not going to kill it. Luckily, I was able to knock down our first ever dire bear. This moment was monumental, and I was excited, as you can see from my character spinning around like a muppet and punching the air. When the bear finally awoke from its assault-induced coma, I named it Baltimore, an icon which would prove to be a vital character throughout this 100 days. I used one of my soul balls on Baltimore to move her back to my base. What a great start. Annoyingly, the dire bear saddle required lots of cementing paste to make, and I had used up all my chitin and keratin on making other items. So I used the Dino Finder mod to see where the beavers are to try and steal some cementing paste from their dens. However, for some weird reason, the beavers were not spawning on the entire map. So I had to resort to hunting dinos that drop chitin and keratin. This process took around a day and a half to complete. I was finally able to craft enough cementing paste to craft my first dire bear saddle. I run outside and instantly equipped Baltimore with it. I straight away took her out for a ride, and man was this dire bear good. At only level 40 or so, it was hitting for around 100 damage. I only imagined what it would be like with level 200 dire bears with bred stats for melee. After realizing the bear's true strength, I went on a little killing spree, murdering any dino in my path to level up Baltimore even more. I was no longer scared of the larger dinos, and I kind of hoped the Rex would try something so I could go band for band and lay him on his ass. To finish up day 16, I spent time using Baltimore to harvest lots of berries and fiber and thatch, because the dire bear was very good at harvesting these materials and they were very much needed. I went back to base where I used my spyglass to see an Alpha Carno in the distance, a potentially worthy opponent for my King Sigma Alpha dire bear. In the morning, I thought that a good base must have a good defense. Thus, my next mission was to make a secure perimeter around my base with 2 Goliath Dino gates on opposite sides to allow entrance into my base. I spent a whole lot of time harvesting all the materials I needed to craft these structures. The whole process took about 2 to 3 days, and by the morning of the next day, I was able to place just one of my Goliath gates. Back to the grind again, I guess. After another long harvesting session, I was able to craft another Goliath gate and 2 of the doors to go with them. All I needed to do now was to create the wooden spike walls to keep out all the hostile dinos. After another long time spent harvesting materials, I had gained enough to craft 35 wooden spike walls. Now I could for sure be safe against any potential threats on this beach. I started placing them in the evening, and by the next morning, I had completed the first half of the perimeter. I then fully completed the other side of the perimeter, and now my defense for my base was fully set up. I could now focus my resources on taming more dire bears and preparing for the boss battles. The next morning, I decided to take another look on the Dino Finder mod to see if any new dire bears had spawned. And to my surprise, a level 150 male dire bear had spawned just a little down the river. However, higher level dire bears had an even worse health to torpor ratio. So I needed to craft a long neck rifle and make some trunk darts before I could even think of trying to tame it. I first put all my resources together to craft the long neck rifle and checked what was needed to craft the trunk darts. I went idle for a little while to let my gunpowder and narcotics craft so I could make the trunk darts. I was unsure of how many I needed at the time, so I just made as much as I could to make sure not to underprepare. And so I began. The next morning I located the bear and climbed atop a large rock. With the bear in my sights, I hit it with a crazy long shot. However, this could be more difficult than I thought, as there was a baryonyx in the way. After a long and scary fight, the dire bear killed off the baryonyx. Now it was my turn to knock out this bear. I hit it through the water and it dashed at me with crazy speed. I turned around and darted towards my old trap. This time, it was much easier. The bear dove right into the trap as I began to unload my trunk darts into its toes. I spent the rest of the day and night shooting the bear, being conscious of its health. By the next morning, I knocked him out, but my graphics drivers crashed, causing my OBS studios to trip out. Once I loaded back on, the dire bear was still knocked out, but its torpor was dropped. So I quickly put some raw prime meat inside of him and waited patiently for him to tame. This series is turning out to be a real success so far, so if you are enjoying this video, then please leave a like and subscribe for more content. When the dire bear finally awoke, I named him Mad Max, another icon in this series, who allowed me to begin breeding for a dire bear army. I renovated my home by demolishing the wooden walls and leaving the base open so it is more accessible. I brought Mad Max back into my compound and sat him next to Baltimore. Max had gained a tidy amount of levels from taming and looked like a great breeding bear. In the morning of the next day, I took Mad Max out to see how good he was at fighting. And man, was this bear good. He dealt around 200 damage of the bat without any additional leveling. So I decided to go on another killing spree with him. Later on, I brought Mad Max back to the compound and next to Baltimore, where I set them to breed and begin my dire bear army. As they were breeding, I began to gather my resources to make a little area designated for breeding the dire bears, using an elevated wooden walkway for the male and a lower area for the female dire bears. In the early game, this proved to be quite an efficient method of breeding. However, in the later game, due to the massive amounts of dire bears being bred, this idea had to be scrapped. But for now, this method worked its magic. Now, I'm not 100% sure where the footage went, but Mad Max in Baltimore bred to produce a little monster of a dire bear, and I called him Lighty after my channel name. I tested him out and he dealt somewhere around 300 damage to the wild dinos around my compound. Once again, Lighty was a huge help in this series. You'll see why later. I ended up finding another high-level dire bear. This one was a female with some decent stats. So I used my age-old method of trapping it. This time was much more smooth sailing as I had sufficient resources to actually knock this one out. I spent the rest of the day and into the next morning just lamping the shit out of this dire bear with my trunk darts until I finally knocked it out. Once done, I fed it and waited patiently for it to tame. Once it awoke, I returned to it and changed its name to Strongette. This female dire bear allowed me to breed the strongest dire bear army possible, pairing her with Mad Max to do so.